Hey everybody, I just got finished a large water change and a few other things that I did to this tank. I shot another video about that, so I'm not going to worry about talking about that right now. But while I was in there, I noticed that smallmouth bass right there is looking really thin and emaciated. So I went out to the garden, to my mulch pile, and I got some small worms. We're going to try feeding the smallmouth in there with some worms. I don't know how well this is going to work out. The Mayan cichlid is probably going to go after them as well. So I'm going to wait until I can see that smallmouth swim up front again. We're going to try to work this out so that we can get the smallmouth fed. I knew I should have opened both the panels on the top. I should have opened the one in the center. Alright, here we go. Let's see what happens. Absolutely nothing. See, I don't think that smallmouth associates that with that food yet. In the wild, worms are not the normal food for fish like smallmouth bass. So if we can get one to wiggle and jiggle, maybe. Look, now there he sees it. Oh, I just spooked him. Let's drop another one in. Well, the little sunfish certainly sees it. Now you may be wondering, what am I going to do if this worm gets away and burrows down into the sand or the gravel and we never see it, which it's about to do right now. We never see it again. I'm not worried about that. I've actually done this before, and as long as that water is well oxygenated, those worms will do just fine in there. Sorry, I'm trying to get another worm out here. Saw the smallmouth over here again. But see, that worm is working its way down into the gravel right now, and we probably very shortly are going to stop seeing it. Here comes the smallmouth around the back. Probably just going to go into the back and hide. Here it comes again. Let's drop another one in and see what happens. Well, it definitely saw it. Don't know if it's going to go after it or not. That worm is certainly making its way down into the gravel pretty quickly. It's going to be gone pretty soon. And we got the sunfish trying to eat one over here, but that bass just doesn't really recognize worms as food. Again, in the wild, they would be eating smaller fish, insects on the surface. I might be able to do something with bringing some. I was wondering where I kept finding chunks of meat floating around from. There is the dead body of a crayfish. So maybe the bass has been pecking away at that a little bit. They're not really scavengers, but as hungry as it is, at least it recognizes crayfish as food. At this point, I'm not ready to start collecting minnows and putting them back in the tank. I'm just afraid, after what I just went through, and I'm still in the process of treating it. Again, I'll attach a card right here if you want to watch the other video I did where I talk about my one final treatment. This is hilarious. If you see the stone that the crayfish just removed from its little cave there, it had that stone out just a minute ago. It was a big round one, and it must have rolled back down inside, and it just carried it right back out again. Here comes that other worm making a dash for it. So back to what the point I was making with the worms. As long as we've got, look at this little tiny sunfish is investigating that crayfish, because sunfish do eat crayfish. That's part of their natural prey. Even as tiny as that little sunfish is, it's already eyeing that crayfish up. But as long as the water is well oxygenated, worms breathe, if you will, through their skin. They exchange gases through their skin. So the reason you see them come out of the ground in rainstorms and in puddles and stuff is because those are anaerobic conditions. They don't have any oxygen in the ground, and it's driving them out to the surface to get to a more oxygen-rich environment. A nice, well-oxygenated fish tank. I thought maybe that Mayan cichlid was going to go for it. I don't know. It still might. But a nice, well-oxygenated fish tank will keep those worms alive just fine and happy. When I had my native tank set up before and I had the largemouth bass in there, several worms got away, and I was worried about them dying and drowning and blowing my ammonia up and all that kind of stuff. And when I got in there months later to actually strip the tank down and clean it out, I was shocked when I started going through the gravel that I found living, healthy worms in it. So that's when I realized it makes sense. As long as they've got enough oxygen to absorb through their skin, they'll be fine in the tank. So I'm not worried about those earthworms being in there and dying under the gravel. And ultimately, I can easily see either the crayfish getting to them or the sunfish are going to get a little bigger. We can see this one over here is investigating that worm again. It won't be long. As long as they're in the tank, I know that they'll be available as a food source for something. They won't stay under the gravel all the time. They will make appearances from time to time. So we now have the addition of worms in the native tank. And I actually think I've got one or two more here in my little container. I'm going to go ahead and throw them into. Yep, I got two more. Hold on a second here. I'm not sure where the camera's going to be pointing for a moment. We'll drop this one in. Well, again, the bass is looking at it and is interested. Maybe enough of them go by and it'll get the point. Never seen a fish run from a worm before. Well, technically I've never seen a fish run, but you get my meaning. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. There you go. We just put a bunch of worms in my native tank and the bass didn't eat a single one of them. So, once again, I'll explain that that's one of the reasons I love fishing for bass. I fish almost exclusively for bass. They are wily creatures, and it takes a little bit of skill to convince them to bite on your piece of plastic that you're trying to convince them is something that's alive, because they're really picky eaters. They're pretty clever, and they've got a very limited natural diet. So to fool them into eating something they're not used to eating is a little tough. So maybe as time goes on, if the fish gets hungry enough, it's not starving, I'm not worried about it yet, but it definitely needs to eat. I suppose there's always the option of going to the big chain pet store and buying half a dozen feeder fish or a dozen little feeder fish and throwing them in the tank just out of necessity for the moment. I could always go catch, well, it's eyeing that worm up now pretty solid, so I think it might ultimately take a chance once I've, stop standing here right in front of it and filming it and stressing it out and everything. So as I said, we're going to go ahead and call that a video. I've still got stuff to think about with this tank. We've still got a video to shoot about where I'm going to go, the direction I want to take this tank, so on and so forth. So lots coming up. Make sure you're subscribed. Don't forget, this one is my native tank. You don't want to miss anything I got coming up on this one. Or any of the other ones. I still do try to shoot video of my other tanks occasionally, although this one is kind of consuming me at the moment. So thanks again, and I will see you real soon on the next one.